All right, guys, how's it going? Quick training on hamstring tightness. Now, I know I speak to so many people, so many clients I work with who just constantly feel the need to like stretch out their hamstrings, no matter how much they're stretching them, how much they're rolling them, how many treatments they're getting in there. It always comes back, and there's always that like lingering tightness and uncomfortable feeling maybe in the back of the knee. Leads to potentially a whole host of other problems, but we're just going to kind of focus on this issue with the hamstring tightness for now. Important to say this is not just like a one-size-fits-all solution. There's going to be some there's going to be a lot of nuances around this, because every single positional kind of thing that we're tweaking and trying to get into play is just going to be dependent on how your body actually reacts to these things, okay? But here's one kind of like, what I want to do today is kind of give an overview positionally on what often leads to that hamstring tightness, especially from like some of the things I see with clients a lot. But yeah, just want you to be cautious doing some of these movements and just be aware that this is not going to be a guaranteed fix for your tight hamstrings, okay? So often the tightness in the hamstrings isn't really to do with the hamstrings, it's the fact that something else is off position that is causing those hamstrings to overwork. So they're chronically tight, they're chronically under tension, doing something that they are doing too much essentially. So what I see a lot with clients is, especially people who sit down a lot, people who maybe tradies, for example, where they've worn tool belts in the past and their hips are sort of pulled forward in this anterior shift position, yeah? So easy way to understand anterior shift is we want the hips and the ankles and the shoulders and the ear as well to all be stacked in a nice vertical line. Anterior shift is where the hips are sort of stacked forwards. And what you'll notice a lot if you're anterior shifted is firstly that your body weight is a bit more like mid-foot, even balls of the foot. You haven't really got too much weight just standing neutrally on the heels. And the second thing is that you've got this like excessive curve in the lower back. That's another really common thing with people who are anterior shifted. And then the third thing, which is where the hamstrings come into play, is that we're just locked out in the knees. Okay, if you're seeing those trends, if you just like look at yourself from a side view in the mirror and you see some of those things come into play, then this is a cue for you to start working on how to fix your hip position and start undoing some of that chronic tightness in the hamstrings. So if I draw a line roughly from the middle of the heel, use your ankle bone for this purposes, it doesn't have to be exact. Standing nice and relaxed, what I want you to do is kind of find roughly the middle of your hip bone. So just from like front to back, we're just looking somewhere in the middle there. Again, just get it roughly. It doesn't have to be perfect. If your hips are stacked forward like this, then we need to work on correcting that first. So the neutral position that we want to start getting you to fix into is where we are getting those hips stacked right back above the heel, okay? That's correcting your anterior shift. So now we're posteriorly shifted. Straight away, you should feel like there's more weight on the back of the heels, on the back of the feet. And then if your knees are still hyperextended in this position, I want you to just give those like a really tiny bend, okay? That is allowing your hamstrings straight away a little bit of space to breathe, okay? So when we are stuck forward in this anterior shift position, if you imagine an elastic band tied between the back of my knee and even like up to the bottom of my hip, top of my hip here, as soon as those hips start shifting forwards, this elastic band really tightens, and then that's what's putting all that strain on the elastic band. Something has to work to stop me just falling forwards, right? So that often ends up being the hamstrings and the calves working together to really tighten up to stop you falling forward. Lots of other things. Some people might get back issues. Some people might get really tight and sort of achy in the hip flexors and around the hip joints here, even into the quads. Okay, so just some like signs to look for initially to know if this is something positionally that you're out in, and you can start working to correct this. So we're going to go through just like a two-step process for this. I know I said about foam rolling. I don't want you to be endlessly foam rolling for days and days without then fixing the new position in place. So when we foam roll, when we do myofascial release, it's about releasing the tension from the place that's storing too much and the places that are contributing to that overactive and over-tensioned areas. And then we need to do the corrective work, we need to do the strengthening work to then fix that new position into what slowly becomes our new default, so that you're not constantly relying on the foam rollers, on the balls, on the massages to ease off that tension essentially. So there's like a few areas that we're going to focus on for this rolling. So we just need to understand what muscles are starting to get really tight when we're pulled forward into this shifted position. And our hamstring is obviously going to be one, so definitely releasing your hamstrings. Easy way to do that is just full, lying on the floor, leg on top. You can use, I'm using a board. If you prefer these, they just get in a bit deeper. You can use the foam roller, you can use like smaller lacrosse ball, anything that works for you, and just slowly up and down a hamstring. Find the tight spot and just sink into it. That's just step one. Step two is going a bit further up into the glute fold. So bottom of your butt cheek at the top of your hamstring. That's another area that gets tighter. Smaller ball is actually better for this one, to be honest. But you can just sort of wiggle around on the side, find any spots that are there. I want you to do this for at least 2 minutes, especially when you find a spot on your body that's like, okay, that's sore. You know that feeling that you're looking for in terms of that massagey relief and tension. So when you find a sore spot there, you're going to hang on that for 2 minutes. So we focus on the hamstring. Top of your calf is another area that we'll be storing a lot of tension. So you can work your way from the top, just slowly coming down into the middle of the calf. Play around on different angles there. And then I want to work on the front. So the hips, we want to go down the adductors, and we want to go down onto the hip flexors. Okay, there are two other areas that are going to store quite a lot of tension, or commonly might store a lot of tension. It's not going to be definite for you. But yeah, so just lying on your front, on that adductor, on that inner thigh, just leg cocking out to the side, and then you're just popping that ball down. I'd like to start just at the top of the knee, and then just sort of slowly work my way down in towards the groin. Again, any spot that you feel that's like storing that tension, you're just going to relax into it. A few nice deep breaths. Try and just let the ball sink a little bit deeper each time. If you find yourself starting to tense up and resist, then you've gone too deep into it. You're fighting against it a little bit. So just go to that point where you can constantly relax. And then that hip flexor, coming down into like maybe a TFL and sort of quad area. There's a lot going on in these hips. You don't need to know the exact areas, exactly what muscles are doing what. You just need to explore your body and find the area that's like feeling tight and holding tension. We're always looking for soft tissue areas, so avoid going onto any bone or anything like that. So on the front, again, just explore those angles, find a spot that's tight, and then just, get nice and comfy, get relaxed, and just deep breathe into it. Okay? Again, 2 minutes a spot. Play around on both sides. You might find that one leg is very different to the other leg, which is another sort of important thing to just be aware of. If your hips are slightly twisted one way or the other when you stand, that's going to play around on, firstly, what leg are you more dominant with when you move and going up and down stairs, whatever it might be. But also if you're like sitting down on a desk and you sort of slouch to this side, the hips are dropped to one side. They often go like a little bit twisted as well. So starting to understand your body a bit more in terms of what's storing too much tension and what's not with these kind of tools is a really good way to just be aware of what positions you're in a bit more. Okay, so once we've done the releasing, spend a good few minutes on that. Find an area that sucks and just work on it. Yeah, like don't do it every single day. Give yourself a day rest in between. But you need to be doing that. You need to be getting into a habit of doing myofascial release quite a lot in the early stages of fixing these kind of issues. Second thing we're really going to start to work on now is correcting that hip position. And I just have one move that I really love for this exercise. It replicates a few different models and a few different training systems we've used through like either functional patterns or through techniques like Gota. Fundamentally, it is replicating a split stance position, okay? So I'll go side on to start. You're going to set up in your walking pace, okay? So we're not going into like a big lunge here. We're not like in a really short stance. You just want to be in a nice, relaxed kind of walking pace. First thing you're going to correct is make sure your hips aren't stacked forwards. You're going to bring those right back above your heel, even back a little bit more to start, just so you're starting to overcorrect that position. We want the core to stay nice and retracted the whole time. I've got lots of other videos that I'll be doing on core strengthening and understanding like different layers of the core, so check out some of those if you're not too familiar with how the core works yet. But just for now, think belly button sort of staying nice and sucked in. Spine's trying to start in that neutral position, and then keeping that center of gravity on your front heel. I want you to hinge back. So I'm not lunging, I'm not letting this front knee bend anymore, it's just staying a little bit soft. And I'm just thinking, as I hinge, I'm stretching that butt cheek as long as I can. Another way I like to imagine it is that I've got an elastic band wrapped around that butt cheek, and I'm trying to stretch that elastic band as long as I can. And then it's a nice heavy elastic band as well. So I'm trying to push tension back. I'm trying to stretch this long. Yeah, straight away, just without any rotation or anything, start feeling a little bit of loading on that glute, sorry. Now, if you've got very, very tight hamstrings, one thing that's probably going to happen as soon as you go down here is that your hamstring's going to take all of the tension, okay? So play around with the positions again. Two things I want you to like watch out for in this initial stage. Firstly, is that your hips don't hike like this. So if your hip on the rear leg, so for me, my left hip here, if that starts dropping down, this right hip's popping out. Now the hip's out of position and the glute can't do the job that it needs to do. It can't grab and function and control the hip position as much. So then if you've already got tight hamstrings or you've got tight hips and tight quads, that's going to start picking up the tension instead. So that's your first correction. And then the second thing is the rotation of the hips. Now, I want you to focus to start on keeping the hips really neutral. So think your two little hip bones, pointing those straight forwards. And then as I hinge, just making sure you can kind of, use a mirror if you can, just hands on the hips to guide. If not, focusing on that hip staying, that glute getting as long as possible. Now, in this position, if you're still not loading up the glute, I want you to try around with two things. Firstly, keeping that knee pointing forwards. We're going to start twisting the hips and the upper body a little bit towards that front leg. So if you've got your right leg forwards, I'm starting to twist those hips towards my front hip. For me, that glute is starting to light up already. Core's nice and engaged. What we're just replicating here is that exaggerated sprint position almost, yeah? A little bit more rotation and reach is going to turn that glute on a little bit more. And once you've found it, then we can start just slowly using that tension to come all the way up. Back up to standing, back to that hip, almost coming nice and straight. A few reps through that. Once you understand that tension that you're trying to feel in the glute, then you should be able to create like a lot of tension with just a few reps. This is like one of the first exercises that I show my clients how to do because it is such a powerful movement in terms of unlocking, firstly, rotation in the hips, because when we're always training in this bilateral stance, we don't allow any rotation through the hips. So being in this stance allows for that rotation, which allows the glute to kind of wake up and the muscle, the smaller, more intricate muscles in the glute to fire more. But yeah, you're going to play around with that on both legs. A couple of little variations you can kind of do to tweak this position and dial it in a little bit more. First one is playing around with pushing the body weight, or bringing the body weight, onto the midfoot, okay? There's a lot of stuff around like foot position and stuff that we need to be like controlling and be careful with. Definitely do this with like either barefoot shoes or no shoes as well, just as a little word of warning. So what I'm doing here is I'm just like bringing, because when we move obviously through that step and through that walk, my body weight pushes off that big toe, and that's like the last connection point before I leave and go into that next step through the gait cycle, right? So I want to be mimicking that when I'm training. So that first position, just being able to load up the glute on the heel, perfect, that's great. But now we want to be able to train that into loading it up on the midfoot. So just keeping that heel slightly elevated, and then it should, once you know what feeling you're looking for in that glute, in this position with that heel very slightly elevated, we should be able to start finding a little bit more hip extension, or glute, engagement through that kind of movement. And then the second thing is taking it into, as I did there, is how do you control that tension through into a step? So when you're someone with very tight hamstrings and anteriorly shifted, what kind of wants to happen is when I step, I want to pick up the back leg through and then plonk that down instead of using the glute to drive the hip through. And then the hip flexor here just working a little bit to kind of like pull the leg through, but it's not the dominant driver. The glute is the dominant driver. Yeah, so then understanding that tension, going the other side. So once we've felt that glute in that stationary position, how well can I hold it into going through into a step? And then that's going to translate to my walking pattern a lot more. It's going to translate to helping me bring in this anterior shifted back into that posterior shift, combined with a lot of other things. Comment below, firstly, if you're getting stuck and getting questions and unable to find that glute, because sometimes it takes a little bit of tweaking, a little bit of nuance. Honestly, as I said, the best thing to do is just start being really familiar with your hip position and not being afraid to try to explore and play around with different angles, different rotations to find that point where the glute is engaged as possible. Fundamentally, you're trying to take it from a very lengthened position into a very shortened position. Yeah, so try and understand and play around with that feeling as best as possible. The second thing I want you to just be wary of and be cautious of, that's going to link to your overall like posture and correction position and fixing that anterior shift, but is how your rib cage connects with your pelvis. Okay, so these two things stacking is like really, really important to sort of elongating and prolonging that fixed position of bringing your hips back, right? So when our hips are shifted forward, what kind of often happens with people is the rib cage also shifts forward as well. So we have this little rib cage flare. We might have a little bit of shearing, a little bit of like pinching sometimes in that middle to lower back area. We get that excessive arch. So these two things obviously work really closely together. It's very hard for my hips to just shift forward without this going anywhere. Like that can happen and you get this like sway back feeling. But what I see more often is like the two working together and then we end up standing a little bit like this. Okay, so when you're training these positions, just be mindful, like obviously we're focusing down here a lot more, but just be mindful of those upper body positions and just think about alignment and connecting everything together as best as possible. Good way you can practice that is just from a side-on view, is getting used to having as flat as possible through the front, so we don't want to feel any rib cage flare. And then when you run your hand down your spine and your lower back, all the way up into that mid-back, we just want to feel like a nice neutral curve. We don't want to be feeling any discs that are kind of like shifted out of position, or if you've got a really big hollowing in one area, kind of just play around with how you can use that core and the hips and the rib cage all together to start pulling that back into a more neutral alignment. I realize that takes it into another tangent. That's looking at like that full body solution rather than just focusing on the hamstring. But I just want you to understand that, again, just doing this one exercise in that split stance is not necessarily going to fix your chronic tightness in the hamstring, okay? It's about a full body solution. This is just a really good exercise that I find helps unlock a lot of people's actual glute engagement, because so many people have very dormant glutes, especially people with very tight and overactive hamstrings. And secondly, it just gets you very aware of like, you know, what's my balance like in this position? How well does my body pick up tension in different places in this position? How am I able to control, like how well can I hinge? Because that is something that a lot of people really struggle with as well. So yeah, any questions, obviously let us know down in the comments. I'll definitely help you out, like if you've got some specific questions or just really struggling to find that glute activation. And then keep an eye out or look forward to those videos that I'll do on core strengthening, because that's going to help a lot as well with correcting that anterior shift hip position and easing off the chronic tension in the hamstrings.